Hello, this is Mesos Orum, and welcome to S.F.M.L tutorials. Today, we'll be constructing a ship class. First, we'll go over here. We'll say ship.c++, as well as over here, we'll say ship.h. In the C++ file, we'll say sharp include ship.h. Then we will go back to the .h file. We will sharp include our entity class. Now we will say class ship, which will inherit from public entity. Then we do our usual private and public. We make our constructor ship, as well as our deconstructor ship. Up here, we will need a constant of half pi, so we will say const float half pi, which equals 1.5707963f. This will be to make sure our sprite is oriented in the correct direction. We need to know how much our ship is thrusting and turning, so we will say float thrust amount, as well as float turn amount, and we'll make that a capital A. We'll need to initialize our variables, so we'll say void init variables. And later on in this video, we'll need to move our ship, so we will say void move ship, and that will take a float of delta time. Down near the bottom, we will say void update, which will take in a float delta time, as well as our SF vector2f window size. Lastly, we will need to render our entities. We will say void render, and it will take in SF render window and window. Now we will define these really quickly. And scroll up. Then we can clean this up a bit better. Down here, we will say entity, and that will take in an address of sprites /ship.png, which will be a size of 32 by 32. We'll give that a little space. Go down here, and we will init our variables. Up in init variables, here we will say this set friction as 0.05. Make sure that's a float. We will set our angular friction as well. Set angular friction, and that will be 0.125 f. We want our ship to loop around the screen, so we will say this set looping, set has looping as true. We will set our frame timer max for our animation as instantaneous, so we will say this set frame timer max 0.0 f. Finally, for our entity, we will set its origin, so we will set origin as this get entity size, and divide that by 2.0 f. We need to set our thrust and turn amount, so we will say thrust amount equals 12.0 f, and turn amount equals 360.0 f. Scrolling down to give us a lot of room, go in here. We need to know which key we are pressing, so first we will say bool a pressed, and we will say SF keyboard is key pressed, SF keyboard scan, that'll be SCAN capitalized, A. For the other two keyboard presses, I'll copy this, we'll say W, and D. Oh, that should not be there. For our if statement, we will say if A pressed, or D pressed, or W pressed. We need a torque amount, so we will say float torque equals turn amount multiplied by our D pressed minus our A pressed. This makes sure that if you press the D button, it will turn us right, and if you press the A button, it will turn us left, and if you press both, it will cancel each other out, and we won't turn at all. Then we add our torque. This add torque, We need to know our rotation amount, so we will say float r equals this get rotation minus half pi. We need our unit vector's direction that we are rotated towards, so we will say SF vector 2f direction equals cosine of r and sine of r. We will then multiply our direction, multiply equals float of w pressed, and this will make sure that if w is not pressed, we will not move in that direction. Then we will add our force. We will say this, add force, direction, multiplied by our thrust amount. Then if any of this is true, we will animate. So we will say this, animate, with an input of our delta time. Finally, we will return so that we do not go on past this. Now, if none of this is true, we will just say this, shift animation to return it to its origin, add 0.0f, 0.0f. Finally, down here, let's close that off, go to update. We will first move our ship, move ship with delta time input. Then we will update our entity, this, update entity with delta time, as well as our window size. Finally, we will draw our entity. We will say window.draw and star this. Here we will say sharp include our ship.h. Something that needs to be done before we continue, we go into the entity.h file and say const here, as well as const here. Back in the SpaceRocks.h file, here we will say ship, and then down here we will say void init ship, and this will take in the same thing up here. And we will define that. And here we will say ship.set position as window size divided by 2.0f. Down here we will say init ship and input our window size. We will update our ship. We'll say ship.update with our delta time and our window size. And we will render our ship, ship.render with window. We will save everything. In our physics class, I made a little goof. We need to add our torque. We also need to scroll down here a little bit. Then we say our absolute function of 1.0 minus our friction. And we will copy this, put it here, and put our other parentheses on. Now we can save. Let's go back into the SpaceRocks folder, scroll up. And finally, we can hit the debug menu. And we can finally see that we can move our ship and turn it. Thank you for joining me today. If you did, then please like, comment, and subscribe, and have a great day.